Hello, everyone. Welcome to our monthly SISMA call, and great one this time. It's National Invasive Species Awareness Week. I hope everyone has gotten to participate or will get to participate in one of the amazing NESOL or weed wrangle events that we've got going on right now. So today's call is going to be about the spectacled caiman eradication efforts with Dr. Sergio Balaguera-Reina. He is a Colombian marine biologist specialized in conservation biology. Specifically, his lab focuses on understanding how ecological processes are influenced by spatiotemporal attributes and how these affect phylogeographic relationships among species in an anthropogenic world. To answer these questions, Dr. Balaguera-Reina uses a combination of methods and technologies derived from fields such as ecology, molecular biology, systematics, statistics, and geosciences to get an integrative view of effects, causes, and patterns. His current research includes using crocodiles, and alligators as ecological indicators in the greater Everglades, linking population parameters and environmental attributes in a spatiotemporal frame, as well as developing conservation and management research of crocodilian populations in Latin America and the Caribbean. And at this, I will stop sharing and pass control over to him. Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you, Deb, and thank you all for being part of this talk. Let me know if I am sharing this correctly.
You might want to switch screens. So there we go. Perfect.
There you go. And let me there you go. So yeah, you guys can see my presentation.
Yes, sir.
Good. Okay, Deb. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me today. I would love to talk today about the spectacled caimans in Florida, and I would like to give an overview of what we've done, what we know, and what's the future for the eradication or release maximum control of these introduced species. So the idea will be just talking about the spectacled caiman introduction and establishment, how these occur, when these occur, and how these occur, what removal and control efforts been done so far in Florida, what's the work that we've been done in the last 11 years as a croc docs. So my work is linked with the work that the croc docs been doing in the last 20 years regarding invasives and 40 years about crocodiles. So what I am presenting today is not the result that I collect, but the result of many researchers collecting data through time. What do we know about spectacled caimans in South Florida? What we've learned? Because it is really important to understand that normally, of course, we will get, if we want to get an idea of the ecology of the species that was introduced, we will reference the ecology of how the species interact with biotic and abiotic parameters in the native range. But it's not always the case that the species behave the same, right? Because the conditions could be different. So we'll be talking about what we learned in all these 11 years collecting data, where we are now, and what will be the future research. So just a brief introduction. We all know that spectacled caimans are native from Central and South America, but these species had been introduced in United States, in Florida and Puerto Rico, in Cuba, and there is an insular area in Colombia where the species was also introduced. In Florida, the species was first reported in the 60s, but was till the 70s that we start seeing breeding population. So we can call that the species was established in the 70s. And the first place where we saw this species reproducing was introduced, and the species started reproducing was the Homestead Area Reserve phase. How this could happen? Well, the hypothesis that researchers had at the time was that these derived from the spectacle caiman trait as it increased when alligator trait was banned because conservation efforts for that species. So alligator trait was blocked, caiman trait start like increased, and people started using this as a pet, this species as a pet, and sadly some of them were released, and here we go. We got this introduced species in Florida. At the time, we were talking about one species, right? The caiman crocodilus. In the 80s, we start talking that these species could be a species complex, and we start talking about 4 subspecies. And since then, we've been thinking that in Florida we had spectacle caiman. We know that we have spectacle caiman, but we weren't sure what subspecies it was. And recently, some molecular work was showing that even though these 4 subspecies that were described before were just based on morphology, when we jump into molecular data, we can see that this species complex could be as complex as 8 species across all the range. So Roberto in 2021, he came here and he analyzed some samples that were at the University of Florida, the Natural History Museum at the University of Florida, and he could start relating these samples to trying to find an origin where these species were coming from. And one sample
Do you hear this?
that he analyzed, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I think it's someone was talking, right?
Yeah, I think we're good now. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry for the interruption. So he analyzed this sample in a sample that was from 1979, and he found that this sample was clustered with samples collected in Colombia, in Panama, and Costa Rica. In the 80s, Ellis was thinking that this species was the origin of this species was Colombia, because all the pet trade that we had at that time. But this was the confirmation based on molecular data that this species, that the spectacle caiman that we have in South Florida was related and potentially coming from Colombia. He also analyzed other samples, and he found that samples that were collected in the 2000, those samples were coming from a specific part of Colombia. So this shows that the introduction events was not just one, but could be multiple, because we start seeing multiple haplotypes that are geographically distributed in Colombia. So looks like the animals are coming from different sources. So far we've been getting caimans all across the Everglades, and we've seen those as north as Palm Beach County. We've seen some species in some individuals in the west area, a lot on the east area. We've seen animals close to areas that are really sensitive, like Everglades National Park, Biscayne National Park, Big Cypress National Preserve. So this is something that we've been worried about, that this species goes into these natural habitats that are really sensitive, and we can control them after. And also something that is really important is that because we are right now under the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, there are some projects going on to recover those habitats. And we've been getting some caimans out of these projects close to these areas. So this is also of concern, because that means that if we recover the system, maybe if we have spectacle caimans there, the population can recover because the conditions are better, and we are just creating more habitat for these species to spread out. So all this is of concern, and that's why we've been working heartily to try to control this species. And it is defined that for South Florida, this species is the highest impact concern. So everyone is aware that we should control spectacled caimans. We shouldn't allow them to grow, because that could be something that after maybe we can't do anything. So we should act as quick as possible. However, as you've been seeing, the species was introduced 50, 60 years ago. And the extirpation efforts at the beginning, there were some efforts in the airbase area. And in 1977, they removed 44 caimans. But after that, we don't really have a lot of documented removals out of the system for spectacled caimans. We do have a document, an analysis that was done in the airbase, trying to analyze how feasible it was to get rid of spectacled caimans there. And they were analyzing 4 scenarios. The first one was doing nothing. The second one was opportunistic surveys. The third one was systematic or periodic surveys. And the fourth one was doing complete extirpation. And the conclusion of that analysis was that complete extirpation will be really difficult, really costly, and we could put in risk other crocodilian species that inhabit this area too. Opportunistic surveys were not really affecting or causing much impact because we continue seeing spectacled caimans in the area. So they decided that the systematic surveys were the best way to keep under control spectacled caimans in the area. So since 2009 till 2019, they start documented again all these removals, and they remove also 44 on that period. They also removed 44 caimans. So croc ducks, we start working here in the 2010, but we start jumping into spectacled caimans in 2012. We did the first removal of the spectacled caimans in 2012. And since then, we've been doing efforts every year, depending, of course, on funding, but we've been trying to keep surveys and trying to remove caimans as possible. So at the beginning, between 2012 and 2016, everything was opportunistic surveys. Every time that someone saw an spectacled caiman, they give us a call. We went there and we removed that animal. But since 2017, we start doing systematic surveys. That means that we start going twice per month, visiting some specific areas. We define 11 routes. So we were visiting those areas so we can really quantify the effort that we were doing, and we can see if we are causing an impact on those population, on spectacled caiman population that is over there. So what we've seen so far, what we've seen so far is like these results that I'm presenting right now is a paper that we published last year and analyzed data from 2012 to 2021. So till 2021, we removed 251 caimans, and we observed 317 caimans. So around 80% of the animals that we've seen, we've been able to remove across these 11 routes that are mainly focused on these SERP projects, Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands and the C-111 Spur Canal, because these 2 areas are really close to these sensitive areas like Everglades National Park and Biscayne National Park. So we've been putting a lot of effort on these areas. And we've been also learning a lot about the ecology of the species in Florida. So, for example, we started learning that the observation peak is October. Uh, and we also have some periods like January and March, where we see spectacled caimans. So before, we were thinking that if we just went, I don't know, summer and we don't see anything, we don't have spectacled caimans. But we learned through all these systematic surveys that you can be visiting an area and you can be seeing nothing. But we have this period where they start showing up for some reason. So the systematic survey is something that is really important, that if you are visiting an area and you are not seeing it, could mean that you are visiting the area in not the correct time. Also, we learned that we see more caimans in marsh habitats, but also we see them in canals. So it's not like a complete preference for shallower areas. They can also be seen on deepest on habitats that the water is deeper, but also in ditches and ponds. So far, what we can say is that out of those 251 caimans that we removed, 90 were males, 22 females, and the others were animals that we can sext. We start seeing a lot of hatchlings. So we have some time when we were removing animals, and all the animals were juveniles or subadults or adults. But in the last years, we've seen a lot of hatchlings. That means that we start getting into areas where they are reproducing. And this is really important because we want to get them before, it will be better if we can get the nest before it hatch. It will be easier to remove them. And also it will be easier, or maybe that will help to capture that female that is laying these eggs. But the overall data is showing that the numbers are decreasing. So here, there you go. So the numbers, based on the effort, the number of spectacled caimans that we are seeing is less and less and less in these areas that we are doing the systematic surveys. We have some areas where we haven't seen spectacled caimans in a couple of years. That will mean that we are doing a really good job and we extirpate the species over there, but maybe what we can say that is more accurate is that we are really causing a maximum species control. That means that we've been putting so much pressure there that the number of individuals there, we diminish the population to a point that now is really difficult, or maybe they are not there. So we can cautiously optimistically say that we are reducing the spectacled caiman populations on those areas. We are causing an impact there. And the populations that years before were distributed in all these areas are completely reduced. However, we also know that this species has a cryptic behavior. That means that we could be surveying some areas, but they could be also inhabiting areas that we are not surveying. Like, for example, we are normally doing surveys in public lands, but maybe they are now they are living in private lands that we don't have access to. So we remove what we can see, but maybe we have some individuals in other areas that we can survey or we can see. So the data is showing that we are going in the right direction, and we can say that we have these introduced species under control in the area that we are doing surveys. However, we need to strengthen our efforts in some other areas just to make sure that we don't have refugia. We don't have areas where the species that we can access, so the species maybe is just there, is reproducing, and what we are seeing is that when those animals just move out of that area. Something else that we were interested is that when Roberto published that paper about only having here in South Florida caiman crocodilus fuscus, we were seeing some individuals that we remove with some marks on the jaws, on the lower jaw. And that was normally a characteristic that you can see on another genetic lineage, another morphometic group, or another subspecies, whatever you want to call it, that is caiman crocodilus crocodilus. So we were like, maybe let's just do the same work that he did, but including all these samples that we have. And we did it, and we published that paper last year, and we found that we actually have two, not only one, but two genetic lineages of spectacled caimans in South Florida. So we have caiman crocodilus fuscus, and we also have caiman crocodilus crocodilus. So if you see, this is the area. So the spectacled caimans that we have in Florida, in one part of South Florida, were more related, were clustered with individuals coming from this area, and the others were clustered with individuals coming from this area. So this was really, really interesting, and this has implications for management. And let me explain why. So if we just zoom into Florida, what we got was these two groups. One group highly related with what we know or what we call caiman crocodilus fuscus, that is east of the Andes mountains in South America. So those animals that we've been seeing close to the Biscayne area are more related to this group. So we can call that those are caiman crocodilus fuscus. But those animals that we've been removing from the C111 Sperry Canal were genetically closer to what we know as caiman crocodilus crocodilus. So if we just get a big picture, of course, these polygons are not really showing the distribution in Florida, but it's just grouping. All these points over here are caiman crocodilus fuscus, genetically speaking, and these points over here are caiman crocodilus crocodilus. The good thing is that they are completely separate, and we don't have admixture. At least we didn't detect any using these markers. However, these markers are not specific for detecting admixture. So that's a future research that we have to do. But what we can say now is that we have two groups in South Florida. We have caiman crocodilus crocodilus and caiman crocodilus fuscus. So what do we know till now? We, as croc dogs, we've removed 304 spectacled caimans between 2012 and 2023. And we know, because it was documented, that from the airbase, it being removed at least 88 caimans. I'm pretty sure, so that this is around 400 caimans. I'm pretty sure that this number is not the final number, because trappers and other people could be removing caimans that information was not documented, and maybe we don't have it here. But these at least give us an idea of how many spectacled caimans have been removed and been documented so far in South Florida. Um, as I was saying, we have two genetic lineages or two subspecies, whatever you want to call them. And this is relevant. This is really important because it has implications in management. But also it tells us that what we have here is the result of multiple introductions. So it's not just that event that we know that happens in the 60s in the airbase area, but for sure we have at least two, because we have two groups, one coming from the Brazil, maybe Guyana, Suriname area, and one coming from the Colombia area. So at least two events, but within those two events, we know that, for example, those samples that are coming from Colombia, so those spectacle caimans that we capture here that are more related with spectacle caimans from Colombia, the haplotypic diversity is higher. So that could mean that the animals that we brought from there were coming from an area with a higher haplotype diversity, or we have animals from different sections for different parts in Colombia, and we did multiple introductions events. So in the case of the caiman crocodilus, we think that could be just one introduction event. But for sure, if that was coming from one introduction event, that could be that multiple animals were released, or maybe multiple introduction events, but coming from the same source, because it is only one haplotype identified so far there. But we still are running analysis. So this is what we got, analyzing 27 samples plus what Roberto analyzed. But we have at least 150 samples that we want to analyze and we want to run to compare to see what else we can tell generically speaking. Something that was really important that we learned till now is that the nesting and the hatching season in Florida moves a bit compared with what they do in the native range. So we learned that the nesting is around mid-June, mid-July, and the hatching is between mid to late September. And that explains why we have that peak in October, because what we were seeing were hatchlings. So those hatchlings allow us, those hatchlings and some females that we captured that were mature, that we captured in March, and we did some necropsies and we measured the follicles and the size and all that allow us to narrow down this important information about nesting ecology of spectacle caimans in Florida. And now we have a better target, right? It will be better if we can find nest, and that's something that we are now trying to do. We also learned that spectacle caimans here are behaviorally different, comparing with the way that they are in the native range. Spectacle caimans in Colombia, Panama, or Costa Rica, they are really protective of hatchlings and of the nest. So normally, if you want to see an spectacle caiman, you could just do the peeping, just make the stress call, and the caiman will come. Or just get close to a nest, and the caiman will come. But here, you can play back. You can do. We try a lot of things, and they learn that they don't show up. So if you see a nest, if you see a bunch of hatchlings, if you play back, the female never show up. That's completely different of what we see in the native range. So for sure, these animals here are learning, and that's why they've been around for so long. So we need to learn about these new behaviors and see how we can use that to help us to control this population. Something important too is that when we are removing all these animals that we have removed so far, we don't see them as skinny animals. Normally, the common shape is a and spectacled caiman in good condition. So they are doing well in Florida. They are doing well in the Everglades. The system is not pressuring them to a point that we can say that the system will by itself crash this population, this introduced population, because what we've been seeing is that these animals are doing well. They are fatty and happy. So we need to control the population because this ecosystem is providing what they need till now, what we've been seeing. What we want to do now is what I was saying, this genetic surveillance. So we already run those analyses with those samples, those genetic analyses. Now we are running these genetic analysis across all the samples, all the animals, all the caimans that we capture so far, because we want to know how many haplotypes we have here. What's the haplotype richness in Florida? And we want to know if we have more genetic lineages. We are doing systematic surveys because now we know that that's the best way to do it. That allow us to make sure that that we can react on time if hopefully not, but if someone just introduce another spectacle caiman in an area and we are visiting that area constantly, maybe we can detect it and we can remove the animal before the animals start interacting with other animals or start reproducing. The important part now that we paying a lot of attention is trying to find this nest. And it's not that before we didn't try. We tried, but it was really, really difficult. The landscape here is really different compared with the native range. So we were trying to apply what we know from them here, but we couldn't find the nest. But last year, we found the first nest. This is a caiman nest. And we got eggs. So now we know what are the conditions and how they are building these nests. So now we can just start targeting these. We can just do this extra effort for looking for and start looking for nest. So maybe we can retrieve this female. This area in particular, where these pictures were taken, is an area where we been getting hatchlings in the last 3 or 4 years. But every time we get the hatchlings, but we can see the female. This female is really, really smart. For sure, there should be males over there. They are smart too, and we can see them. We see the hatchlings, we retrieve the hatchlings, but we can get those adults. So maybe now that we know when they are nesting, we know how they build a nest, maybe we can do something to try to capture and remove this animal from this area. And as I was saying before, strengthening the removal efforts is something that we have to do. We just need to know if we have these refugia. So we need to collaborate and work with public and private lands to just make sure that we don't have areas where we don't have access and the population and some individuals can just grow and make the population, and just what we are seeing is the animals that are moving out of those refugia. So this is a really important part, just to make sure that we are maximizing control. So future research, we want to do this population genetic analysis. As I was saying, the markers that we use are more intent for phylogeographic analysis, trying to understand how they were related with the native range. That was mitochondrial markers. But now we want to use nuclear markers, codominant markers, that allow us to do some population genetic analysis. And now that we know that we have 2 genetic lineages, it is really relevant for us to understand if these 2 are admixturing or not, because that could boost the population that we have here, reduce the bottleneck, and that could just make the the invasion more difficult to control. So this is something that we want to do, and we think that will provide really good information for managers on how to handle the situation with these introduced species. And also something that we are working on right now, it's analyzing all the stomach content and understanding how the caiman populations are impacting the Everglades trophic web, what they are eating and what trophic level they are on. Because at the end of the day, when we are talking about an introduced species, the first impact will be predating on the species that don't know how to react, or predating on or competing with other species by prey, because the prey, so that could affect species that are in the same trophic level or species that are in a different trophic level. So we want to understand what's the trophic impact that spectacle caimans have on the Everglades ecosystems. That's all.
Awesome, thank you. We got some questions in already. This is a couple tied together. So do you think that the lack of predators in Florida could be responsible for their lack of response to distress calls? I would think the juveniles would still be susceptible to predation, though. Are there any theories as to why this behavior is different between the native and introduced ranges?
What I'm guessing is that they just learn. So something that we can see in native range is that areas where the species is hunted, they learn so they don't react as quickly as they do in other areas where hunting pressure is low. So what I'm guessing, what is happening here is because the pressure that we've been putting on trying to remove, these animals just learn not to react to these events, like for example the distress call, and that really surprised me when I came here, because I'm from Colombia and I'm used to do the call and see them just running towards you. And I came here and I saw the hatchlings and I did the call and nothing happened. We picked them up and the female never show up. So I think that is just I'll say that this female was, maybe someone tried to get it and she escaped and she learned. Now she's not showing at all. So that's really, really interesting. And for sure that make the process difficult to retrieve, to remove these animals from there. We've been getting we've been getting hatchlings for 4 years. We've been trying to get the female, but she never show up.
So it's kind of like our feral hogs, that if you don't catch all of them, some of them learn and then become trap shy.
I will say that something like that could be happening here with spectacle caimans.
So we have another question is, can't we start eating caiman tails? Are they possibly a food source?
Can we start eating caiman tail? Yeah, yeah. I don't know if there is any restriction over here, but in Colombia they eat caiman, and people say that it is really good. So yeah, I'll say yes.
So pardon this if this is a dumb question. I am much more of a plant person than a reptile person. So how do you differentiate the caimans from our native crocodilian species?
So morphologically, they are really different. So you see that picture that I have here as a background, that's an spectacle caiman, and some, like the first feature that you can recognize just to make this species unique is this little like eyebrow. Like you see that the eye looks like he's like, like lifting his eyebrow a bit. that's um an a bond structure that they has on top, and that just give that sensation of an that's why it is called spectacle caiman.
Okay.
Uh, American crocodiles eyes are really small. They don't have that. So you will see an eye of an American crocodile, and it looks smaller comparing with a spectacled caiman. And for gators, they don't have that either. The shape of the animal is different, like, comparing a spectacled caimans with American crocodiles, and American alligators and spectacled caimans. Spectacled caimans tend to be smaller. The color is different, is brown compared with a American alligator that is darker. The shape is less uh, duck shape. Like American alligators is more like, the U shape. Spectacled caimans are more irregular, the shape of the head. So they are a bunch of a morphological features that can allow you to recognize them easily.
Oh, cool. How long do they tend to live out in the wild?
I think that I haven't read any like records, like, but we know that more than 30 years for sure. And also we know that they can reach maturity and start reproducing at a really small size. So that's why spectacle caimans are an interesting species, because, for example, in the native range, even though hunting pressure was really high, it was never actual conservation concern, but it was more a management concern, because people weren't using the species sustainably. But we knew that because the ecology, and they start reproducing really small, they protect hatchlings. You can see a mom with hatchlings and yearlings and animals that are 2 years all together. So they are really protective. So we know that these species can grow, the population can grow really fast, comparing, for example, with American crocodiles. They are more hierarchical, more um, solitary individuals. Solitary is a solitary species, so you don't see these type of behaviors there. So I think that the point with the spectacle caimans, and why we need to pay attention, is that if we don't control it, the population can grow really fast. If we, hopefully not, but let's say that we bring on an Nile crocodile, that population will grow for sure, but not as fast as an spectacle caiman population. If we put it, if we compare these two species. So that's why this is a species that we have to pay attention, and we can stop monitoring because the population can grow really fast.
Well, that's really cool. I'm glad to hear about all the work you're doing down there and really appreciate your time. Do we have any more questions coming out? I haven't gotten any more in the chat box. So thank you very much, Dr. Balaguera-Reina, and we will move on to our Treasure Coast SISMA update now. We'll be with Sarah and Carrie. Hey, Carrie. Can you hear me?
Hey.
Yeah.
Yep, I can hear you guys. I think Sarah was gonna go first, but I don't see her. There's so many people on.
She might have gotten kicked off. I am not seeing her either. So if you want to go ahead.
Okay.
And hopefully she'll be able to join us.
Okay, perfect. So my name's Carrie Blackfinch. I am a new co-chair for the Treasure Coast SISMA. Antonio Rodriguez, I think he actually gave a brief update on the last SISMA call, but he's my other new co-chair. We are really excited to step into this role. The Treasure Coast SISMA, I feel like we're a fairly active group. We have a really good steering committee and a very active steering committee, and most of our positions are full, which is exciting. I just have a few slides prepared for you guys. So one thing that I wanted to highlight, let's see. Okay, so stepping into this new role, Antonio and I kind of made a list of overarching goals that we wanted to focus on for the SISMA. One of those was just improving camaraderie and networking. And to that effect, Antonio put out a call to update our Treasure Coast SISMA like banner or logo. And so the logo that you guys are seeing was actually submitted by a member of the Treasure Coast SISMA. We're super excited to kind of use it in our branding and awareness, and just we were really happy to, get that sort of response from the group. Okay, so the other goals that we're working on, we'd like to have a kind of a long-term goal and then a series of smaller project goals. The Treasure Coast SISMA is pretty workday forward. We have anywhere from, usually try to have around 6 to 8 work days a year. So we just take off a few months for the hot summer months, and then we have a work day during all of the cooler months. We're also working on a long-term project, which is part of what Sarah was going to talk about. It's very tied in with private lands and public lands. Oh, she's here now. Yay. Okay, so the Cohesive Coastline Project, which is going to be our long-term project, has to do with Scaevola toccata removal in the SISMA. I think Sarah's going to talk a little bit about the private land side. And then I was just going to share a little bit about the survey work that we're doing. So this is really going to be a multi-year project for us. Probably back about 10 years ago, the SISMA went for a grant to remove some scaevola on public lands. We're looking to do go after similar funding, and then just kind of tackle it from a public-private partnership approach. So our first step has been trying to map all of the scaevola throughout our SISMA, which is a lot. It's about 80 miles of coastline that we're trying to map, and scaevola is the #1 invasive in that dune system. So before we could even talk about what grants we're going to get or how we're going to try to tackle the scaevola, we had to figure out how to map it. What we've kind of come up with is using this ArcGIS Online sketch layer. It's really fast. I was able to cover about 20 miles of coastline on my own in 4 to 6 hour survey days, so it's not super labor intensive. It's not, if you guys can see this, the picture on the left with all of the red, that's like all of the scaevola that I found in that 20 miles. And in big stretches, it looks like solid red. And then the right is kind of like a blow up. So this sketch layer in ArcGIS Online, if you guys aren't familiar with it, is, oops, kind of lets you on the fly digitize, like just drawing with your finger around where you're seeing the plant. And a lot of times, this isn't actually a great example of it, but a lot of the times if you're standing on the beach, you can see what is scaevola just by looking at the aerial, and it's easy to circle that scavola. It's not so easy if you go back to the office and you're trying to figure out, like, you know, is this scavola, is it not? So we figured out this ArcGIS sketch layer. It was a fast, easy way to visualize all of the scavola in our system. So far, we've reached out to several of the other counties, and everyone is pretty on board for trying to get this done, which we're excited about. Once we have a map for the entire SISMA, we're then going to tackle how we can move forward with working on scavola from the public and the private side. More than likely, the private side is going to look like outreach, because obviously we're not going to go out and treat everyone's private lands, but it's a start and we are very excited about it. Another thing that Antonio and I did, just stepping into this new leadership position, is just do a rough draft of a calendar. So like I said, we're pretty workday forward. This is our 2024 calendar. We are trying to have at least one workday during all of the cool months, and then have some sort of event in all the hot months. So we only have one big annual meeting a year, but we have either a workday or a social or a workshop in each of the other months. So this year in May, we're planning a Celeria workshop, and for the first time for our SISMA, we are trying to offer CEUs for it, and we're also going to have an online version. So I know Deb is super good about updating the calendars. I hope that some of you guys from other SISMAs will be able to attend, at least virtually, that workshop. In September, we're going to try to do a grass workshop as well. And then, as I said before, our steering committee is super active. I think every position is full as far as our subcommittees, and we have pretty regular subcommittee updates and meetings as well.
Awesome, thank you, Carrie. Those do sound like some really cool workshops that you guys have planned. And we'll go ahead and pass it over to Sarah. And we've got just about 8 minutes to keep ourselves on time, as an FYI.
Okay, I'm gonna go quick. Thank you, Carrie. That was a great introduction to the scavola. Let's see. Uh-oh.
I'll probably need to remake you.
Yeah, I got my computer kicked me off and I had to come back in. Sorry.
I just made you a co-host again, so you should be able
Okay. Oh yeah, I see it now. Okay. So from the beginning, I'm not going to dig into some of this stuff because it's just, yep, we're TC SISMA. And our, so I'm the Private Lands Projects Committee Chair in the SISMA, and in my role is to work to help facilitate some of these projects that are invasive species related on private lands. We all know how important it is to work with both private landowners and public land managers and just all the stakeholders to reach our goals. And so just a little snapshot into the past and the present, and then looking to the future, some of trying to think about the different ways that we kind of work with private lands. There are many different types. So we've got individual private resident owned lands. There's community HOAs and POA, condo association type managed lands. But there's also private NGO conservation lands that occur within the SISMA footprint. And so how we interact with them all depends on what type of land they are on private land. In the past, projects have mainly focused on initial invasive species control and maintenance, and education and outreach opportunities. And they've been carried out through partnership and community work days on private lands, through grant support, contracts, education and outreach, and also just having private landowners fund their own work once they've learned the ways. Some of the projects we've done past and present have been out at the Boy Scout Camp Tonakita in Martin County, I'm not gonna dig into all of this stuff. If anyone wants to see these slides later or wants more information, feel free to send me an email. That is one of our larger privately owned conservation lands in the SYSMA. So that's one of that type of project. This is a site that's up in Indian River County that several years ago, this land was vulnerable to development. A private citizen purchased it. She wanted to protect it for scrub jays and worked with the TC SYSMA to do a variety of things out there, invasive species control, also some roller chopping and just habitat restoration. And then after all that work was completed, that land was sent over to the county. And so that's now managed today as public land. So happy story. In the past, we've worked on ranch lands and provided trainings on some of the interior. We're not so focused on that today, but it's a place where we have done some work in the past. We've had some outreach in the past also for, as Carrie mentioned, scabola. However, that was there was a lot of effort put into some of the education and outreach, but not so much in the actual removal of scabola. So it's something that that's planting the seed there, working towards improving in the future. We worked with HOAs up in St. Lucie County, especially where there's been some rare species, and in Martin County and Palm Beach County and some scrub. We've also been up in St. Lucie County working on another private conservation land along the St. Lucie River that's owned by the Audubon. And we had a NISA work day on some private beach land back in 2019. We've also worked again with HOAs. So this is an example out in Jupiter where we've worked with an HOA to help them have their own community work days, but also gave them enough consultation of where their invasive species were so that they could actually just fund the removal of those invasives themselves. They didn't want them there. They wanted to remove them. They just needed our help showing them what to do. So that was great. We should definitely want to do more of that in the future. Let's see. And then most recently we worked with a condo association to facilitate removal of their invasive scabola on their beach dune. It was a great success story. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know the benefits, but once we talked to them and connected with them and gave them the tools and the information, and also working with funding support from the Fish and Wildlife Service, we were able to have removal of their invasive scabola, but also continued management. And it's a nice, healthy sea oats and native dune today. So that's kind of spurred our thinking and wanting to be able to do more of this and having a greater impact using similar methodology, providing presentations and workshops, and just improving this beach dune system as a whole. So anybody thinking about or working with private lands in their SYSMA, things to think about is just what type of land you're working with and how to approach it, different methods you might want to consider. If it's a larger private conservation land, maybe tackling that through cooperative and community work days, and some training with private landowners, homeowners. It's, maybe more education and outreach, and then larger scale, ecosystem-based projects. This is more what Carrie and I are talking about here, looking at the beach dune and thinking about that whole system and how we can work with public and private landowners to reach our goal there. Challenges to consider thinking about private lands. In your SYSMA, you're going to have people that are coming from public agencies. You're going to have private organizations, and not everyone can always work easily on private lands. So you might need to think thoughtfully about how you're going to work on these lands. There are MOUs that can work for this, with different types of volunteer waivers and agreements. But just being mindful of public perception, even, do we want a bunch of public employees necessarily working on private land? Then you get, Joe Homer down the street saying, well, why aren't you coming out and doing my landscaping? So just kind of trying to figure out how to do that in a thoughtful way so that we reach our goals with all the tools in the toolkit. So looking ahead, we are thinking as our biggest next endeavor that we really want to set forth to do is this Beach Dune Coastal Footprint Project. And so, like Harry said, mapping out the scabola, working with public and private landowners, and coordinating that ecosystem-based approach to reduce invasive species impact on our beach dune system that is so important here in the SISMA region. But also continuing to provide landowner consultation and support, guidance to HOAs and POAs, connecting with landowners of large seed sources that are adjacent to public conservation lands, and then just providing that general private landowner resource and information so that we can empower people to potentially just pay to have their own invasives removed. So I'm going to stop. And if anybody has any questions or would like to talk about this more, I think, yep, I had a question slide. You can get in touch with me anytime. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sarah and Carrie. You guys have some really cool projects you're doing down there. We are right at 2:30. I'm going to blow through the slides I have real quickly because I definitely want to highlight all the amazing weed wrangle events that we have. So we've had a bunch that have already happened, and some of the results were shared in the chat if you didn't get a chance to see that, but there's several more great weed wrangle events, and there's a great workshop up in Ponte Vedra tomorrow if you aren't aware of that yet. So looking at how those fall out on the map, I just want to give a shout out to everybody on the East Coast. We've got a lot of events showing up there for Florida. Beyond that, there's a lot of other great work days and some workshops coming up. Primarily the Fisk Annual Symposium. If you haven't registered for that, check it out yet. Really cool. Also want to let everyone know the FWC Uplands Program Handbook is out now. I will be sharing that on the monthly digest next week, but it's also on the Florida Invasives website on our resources tab. And we've got a lot of other really great webinars scheduled for this year, and anything that we've had already is up on our YouTube channel, and today's recording will be up there in a few days. Thank you all very much for making time, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.